Vivec craves radical freedom, the death of all limits and restrictions. He wishes to be all things at all times, every race, every gender, every hero, both divine and finite. But in the end, he can only be Vivec.
At long last, I'm excited to bring you the final episode of the Tribunal series. And in this one, I'll be diving into one of the most complex, contradictory, and philosophically rich characters in video game history, Vivec, also known as Vehk. To really capture just how layered and enigmatic this character is, I thought the best way was to open with the words of someone who knew it best, its fellow living god, Sotha-Sil. For me, Vivec has always been one of the most fascinating figures in the Elder Scrolls universe, precisely because of that diversity and depth in its story. It's a mortal, a god, a general, a poet, a liar, and even a murderer. It embodies all of these roles at once. It's one of the most important figures in Elder Scrolls lore, playing a part in countless pivotal events throughout history. Its story is built around themes of duality, betrayal, divinity, and metaphysical awareness, all while immersing us in a world filled with symbolism. Vivec's character isn't just a story, it's a riddle, one that has shaped the fate of the Dunmer people for thousands of years, while also raising profound questions about the very fabric of reality in Tamriel. In this video, I'll try to unravel the mystery of Vivec, the embodiment of complexity in video game characters, layer by layer. To be honest, that's an impossible task. The deep symbolism at the core of its own writings about itself, combined with the fact that the Elder Scrolls universe often slips out of a linear timeline because of metaphysical phenomena like dragon breaks, makes it impossible to fully solve the riddle that is Vivec. Still, I'll do my best to explore some questions. For the ones that can't be answered, I'll encourage us to reflect and build theories together. At the very beginning of this video, I want to ask you these questions, and by the end, I'd love to hear your own thoughts on them. Who really was Vivec? A savior or a traitorous murderer who betrayed its friend? A true god or a fraud? And what does its strange story tell us about the very reality of the Elder Scrolls universe? It might sound complicated or even absurd, but these very questions are at the heart of why we admire the Elder Scrolls universe so much. I hope you realize that, because this video, and really this whole series, isn't just about the biographies of a few game characters, it's also a deep reflection on power, greed, love, friendship, divinity, duality, and the very nature of being human. So without further delay, let's dive into the epic tale of a mortal rising from the ashes, achieving divine power, becoming a god, and ultimately losing itself within the fictional nature of its own existence. Enjoy the video. The first step to understanding Vivec's identity is to look at its mortal beginnings, and how those beginnings were later rewritten through its own divine narrative. As I mentioned earlier, Vivec's metaphorical and therefore unreliable way of storytelling reveals itself right from the start, with two contradictory origin stories. I can't tell you which one is true and which one is false. Like I said, in the Elder Scrolls universe, time sometimes breaks in such a way that every possibility exists at once. That's the game's way of respecting each player's choices. Vivec, of course, makes things even messier. Let's take a quick look at those two accounts. The first version is written in simpler language, describes more realistic events, and because of that, it's generally the more widely accepted one. Born in Mournhold as the child of a Netch hunter, Vivec, whose birth name is unknown, had a modest and difficult start to life. As a child, it worked alongside its father in the same trade. It would later recall how the hunters back home would laugh when the hunts went well, and how it grew strong enough to walk through the ash with its father and push a boat through the silt. Eventually, young Vivec began living on its own in Mournhold. To survive on the streets, it even became a gang leader for a while. Since it couldn't read or write, it focused on singing and dancing, claiming it would try just about anything to earn some money. This life of survival changed when it met Hortator Indoril Nerevar, a caravan guard. Nerevar, a clever chimer, saw the potential within Vivec, and the two quickly formed a strong bond. Vivec joined Nerevar's ambition to free Morrowind from the Nordic occupation, becoming one of his most trusted generals and advisors. After their friendship deepened, Vivec took on that name for itself, inspired by the V on Nerevar's seal. It's also worth noting that around this time, Vivec took in and raised young Sotha-Sil, who had been the sole survivor after Mehrunes Dagon destroyed his village. In time, Almalexia would join Vivec and Sotha-Sil, and the three would become known as the Tribunal, Nerevar's most trusted advisors. The second version comes from the sacred text known as the 36 Lessons of Vivec, and it presents a very different mythological origin compared to the first account. To be honest, I think this version was designed as a tool of religious propaganda, meant to erase the humble, mortal past of the Tribunal, who I consider to be false gods, and especially of Vivec, in order to legitimize its divinity. But without rambling too much, let me tell you this story as well. In this account, Vivec is actually a divine being crafted by Almalexia and Sotha-Sil. It develops as an egg in the womb of a Netch hunter's wife, whose gender was altered to become an aquatic being, and before its birth it is visited by Daedric princes who bless it with wisdom. In this version, Vivec even claims that it was once born as Mephala in the past. You can see how this comes across as an attempt to transfer the faith in the Dunmer's three good Daedra onto the new gods, the Tribunal. Now, I won't go too deep into the details of this second story, because its heavy metaphysical elements could really cloud your mind. Instead, I want to highlight a few key points about these two narratives. First, they're not just lore inconsistencies or retcons, they're a deliberate choice to express the very essence of Vivec's character. Its dual nature and its ability to manipulate truth itself are clearly communicated through the existence of both stories. The mythological birth account can be read as proof that Vivec used its divine power to retroactively reshape its own past. After all, it frequently emphasized that it had the ability to travel back and alter events, a claim I'll cover in detail when we get to Nerevar's death. But keep this in mind, from the very start this positions Vivec as an unreliable narrator, and it means we should question everything we hear from its mouth. I'd really appreciate if you approach what's being told here with that perspective. The greatest rise in Vivec's mortal life came from its role in the historic events that led to the confrontation at Red Mountain. As Nerevar's advisor, Vivec played a crucial diplomatic role in forging an unlikely alliance between the Khmer and their ancient enemies, the Dwemer, to drive the Nords out of their lands. This alliance was a major step toward Morrowind's independence, but its foundations were fragile. Together with Almalexia and Sotha-Sil, Vivec harbored deep suspicions about the Dwemer's true intentions. They repeatedly warned Nerevar about the fragility of this peace, but Nerevar relied on his personal friendship with the Dwemer king, Dumak. Those suspicions were confirmed when the Dwemer discovered the heart of Lorkhan deep within Red Mountain. Kagrenak, the Dwemer's chief tonal architect, began using this divine power to construct a massive brass god called Numidium. To the Khmer, this act was nothing short of blasphemy against their religious beliefs. The fragile alliance collapsed, and war broke out. Vivec fought as one of Nerevar's generals during this war, proving its loyalty, military genius, and skill with a blade many times over. Though the Khmer ultimately emerged victorious, the war set in motion a chain of events that would alter the fate of the entire people. I've already covered the details of the Battle of Red Mountain in earlier videos of this series, but for those who are watching for the first time, let me give you a quick summary. As the Dwemer and Khmer armies clashed, Kagrenak used his own crafted tools on the heart of Lorkhan at the height of the battle. Numidium came to life, and the result was completely unexpected. The entire Dwemer race vanished from Nirn in an instant without a trace. What remained was the divine heart of the dead creator god Lorkhan, along with the tools Kagrenak had designed to control it. The heart's power symbolized a temptation no mortal mind could resist: godhood. After the war, Kagrenak's tools fell into the hands of the victorious Khmer. The brilliant engineer Sotha-Sil studied them and discovered how to tap into the power of Lorkhan's heart. Even though Vivec, Almalexia, and Sotha-Sil had sworn a sacred oath to the dying Indoril Nerevar and to the Daedric prince Azura that they would never use the tools or the heart's power, they broke that oath. They drew upon the heart's power and elevated themselves to godhood. You probably know what happened next. The Tribunal ruled over the Dunmer people for more than 3,000 years. Azura, enraged over what had been done to her champion Nerevar, cursed the Khmer, transforming them into the Dunmer, and pronounced the Nerevarine prophecy, foretelling that the Tribunal would one day fall. From that point on, the Dunmer ceased worshipping Azura, Mephala, and Boethia, the so-called good Daedra, and instead began worshipping the Tribunal, the living gods of Morrowind. Within this new pantheon and political order, Vivec emerged as the protector of artists and tricksters, and as the most publicly visible of the three gods. The Tribunal gods held divine power for thousands of years and left an indelible mark on the history of Tamriel. Yet, just as Azura's prophecy foretold, their inevitable downfall came. Each of the three has a story with its own sorrow and fascination, and each represents concepts worth discussing. But throughout all the years they ruled, there was one thing that directly connected these three living gods: Indoril Nerevar. The death of Indoril Nerevar, in my view, is one of the greatest mysteries in Morrowind's history and forms the central moral conflict for all the Tribunal characters, especially Vivec. As I mentioned before, there are two main narratives about this event, which I've talked about in earlier videos. Briefly, in the account preserved by the Tribunal Temple, Indoril Nerevar succumbed to mortal wounds he had suffered during the battles of the Red Mountain War. According to the Temple's version, Nerevar died as a hero, and the Tribunal only chose to use the Heart of Lorkhan years later for the good of their people. Vivec itself even told this story to the prophesied Nerevarine millennia later, firmly denying any accusation of murder. In contrast, the Ashlander tradition, preserved by Nerevar's shield companion Alandro Sul, claims that the Tribunal, driven by their hunger for divine power, treacherously killed Nerevar. The Heart's allure overwhelmed the three, and during a savage ritual of poisoned candles, robes, and prayers, they murdered him so that he would not stand in their way. This is the version I personally choose to believe, as it paints the Tribunal gods as both imposters and usurpers. The deep divide between these two narratives naturally split Dunmer society for thousands of years, creating a lasting polarization. And in my opinion, Azura herself also accepted the second version of events, hence her actions of cursing the Chimer and declaring the Nerevarine prophecy. What makes the topic of Nerevar's death so intriguing and complicated are Vivec's own words. This poet-souled trickster god didn't plainly tell the truth. Instead, it left behind hints that both suggest its guilt and hide it behind layers of philosophical games, leaving the Elder Scrolls community bewildered for years. The most famous of these confession-like clues is hidden inside Vivec's own holy writings, the 36 Lessons of Vivec. Open Sermon 36, take the first letter of each paragraph, and you'll get the phrase, foul murder. If you're a dedicated lore fan, that phrase immediately brings to mind Michael Kirkbride's artwork of the same name, the one you're seeing colored on screen right now. That drawing is Kirkbride's depiction of Nerevar's death. Considering both the frequency of hidden messages in Vivec's texts and the way its character operates, it's hard to see foul murder as a coincidence. And here's another coded message scattered within those sermons. He was not born a god. Fate did not drive him to this crime, he chose this path by his own free will. He stole divinity and murdered the Hortator. This line isn't something Vivec directly wrote, it's a phrase uncovered through a cipher shaped by its words. But don't forget, it's still something Vivec deliberately planted between the lines of its sacred scripture. Another clue on this topic unfortunately takes us outside canon and into the meta-textual role-playing activities of Michael Kirkbride and a few other developers. The Trial of Vivec. Some people might get annoyed that I'm mentioning this since they consider it non-lore, but I think it's important to know. In this role-playing event, Vivec, on trial, wears a mask said to prevent it from lying and presents the jury with this paradoxical statement. Mortal Vehk killed the Hortator. God Vehk did not, and it remained as written. And yet, these two are the same being. Poetic, isn't it? This is Vivec's ultimate defense, written by Kirkbride, who contributed so much to the Elder Scrolls universe. According to this statement, an event like a dragon break, which altered reality at the moment of Vivec's godhood, created an ontological distinction between its mortal, guilty self and its divine, innocent self. Vivec admits to committing the murder, yet simultaneously claims that the killer no longer exists. On the other hand, this can also be interpreted as meaning that, through the divinity it attained, Vivec was able, if conditions allowed, like during a dragon break, to reshape reality itself. In this sense, Nerevar's death could have happened in a reality created by Vivec, exactly as the Tribunal Temple narrative describes, yet the one who shaped that reality and killed Nerevar was Vivec itself. Here lies Vivec's great paradox and profound moral duality, laid bare for all to see. What a character story. What I really want to say is this. The part of the Tribunal gods that fascinated me the most was realizing that, at least to some extent, they understood they were characters trapped in a video game, a simulation, whose fates were not entirely in their own hands. This was just one of the many philosophical questions about life in the Elder Scrolls universe, but it completely blew my mind. I explored this perspective from Sothasil's side in my previous video. Now, let's try to understand how aware Vivec was and to what degree. To grasp even a partial understanding of Vivec's deepest secret and ultimate power, I need to explain the Elder Scrolls universe's fundamental metaphysical structure. This structure, known as the Orbis, represents the entire cosmos as the dream of an unknown, sleeping cosmic entity called the Godhead. Mortals, Daedric princes, Oblivion, Nirn, and all gods, In short, everything we know about the Elder Scrolls is part of this dream. Imagine that if this entity wakes up, the dream ends, and everything we have ceases to exist. This framework draws deep influences from Gnosticism and Hindu philosophy, which I'll explore in detail shortly. But for now, it's enough to understand that this shows us that reality itself, as defined by the universe's structure, is subjective and mutable. I hope I've been able to explain the dream-reality relationship a bit. Remember, I'm describing all of this as if I were a mortal within the Elder Scrolls universe. From our perspective as players who know this is a video game, we can make various interpretations about what these things symbolize. For example, the entity I call the Godhead might see the dream as the player turning on their computer and starting the game. Or it could be a depiction of the form the player's mind takes when entering the game. You see where a Vivec video can take us? This universe is truly enormous. Without straying too far, if you know a little about Vivec, you've probably heard of the concept of CHIM. CHIM is a controversial topic, and some people try to treat it as non-canon. In the dream reality context I just explained, CHIM represents the ultimate state of enlightenment. CHIM is the process of realizing that a being is part of the Godhead's dream. Most who reach this awareness cannot maintain their individuality and are completely erased from existence through a process known as zero-sum. In a sense, this is what would wake the Godhead from its dream. Therefore, CHIM is like walking a very risky tightrope. Reaching CHIM properly means preserving one's individuality through the power of will while simultaneously realizing one's own non-existence. In other words, it's understanding that you are part of a dream, yet still asserting, "I exist." This concept can be extremely difficult and complex to grasp, and that's because it is. A being who reaches CHIM gains a clear control over the dream of existence, which grants the power to bend reality and shape it as desired. Besides Vivec, it's also known that Tiber Septim achieved this state. Vivec's path to CHIM is symbolically described in its sermons, where it recounts lessons learned from the Daedric prince Molag Bal. Now, I think I've clarified the situation of the self-aware god Vivec a bit. Vivec's CHIM-derived awareness provides strong evidence that it understands it is a video game character. Through this awareness, it comprehends not only the rules of the universe, but also its own fictional nature. Let's return to Vivec's 36 lessons. These sermons contain many references to the player and game mechanics. Sermon 19 describes a mortal interaction, filled with knowledge to its capacity in a non-spatial area, which can be interpreted as a perfect depiction of a game server or the internet. Vivec also mentions the fixed war, in which a warrior opens sleep gaps in the middle of battle to regain its power. Strange as it may sound, this can serve as a clear metaphor for a player sitting at a chair, fixed in place, reloading a saved game to regain their strength. Remember in my Sothasil video, I discussed the prisoner archetype. According to Sothasil, the player character, the prisoner, is the only being able to see the walls of the prison and escape from them. If we interpret the walls as the game boundaries displayed on the monitor and escaping as closing the game, then everything we've discussed about Vivec aligns perfectly with Sothasil's concept of the prisoner. In this context, CHIM becomes an in-game explanation for powers a player has, like reversing time or modifying the world with console commands. Vivec is the only NPC we encounter who possesses CHIM, recognizing us as a being with godlike powers just like itself. That's why the Nerevarine prophecy isn't just about the return of a figure, it's also the rise of a prisoner with divine power, meaning the player. I want to mention one more interesting interpretation. In Morrowind, Vivec's role was to guide us so that we could complete a scenario in which the world would be saved, even if we killed it. Yet it refused to fight us. Could this be because it knew we had the power to reload a save, and that, therefore, our defeat was impossible? I'll leave that question for you to ponder. I've tried to explain as clearly as possible Vivec's awareness as an NPC. I definitely recommend reading Vivec's 36 lessons. Although the language is highly symbolic, as you learn more about the lore and explore related theories, some of the hidden messages begin to emerge. Now, as we do in every episode of this series, we can move on to examine the philosophical reflections of the character in our real world. From the beginning of the video, I've often mentioned that one of Vivec's most defining traits is its deep and layered duality. But what exactly does this duality represent? Once again, our path intersects with Hindu mythology. In my videos on Sothasil and Almalexia, I also discuss their connections to Hindu myth. In Vivec, we see parallels to Hindu mythology as well, particularly with the god Ardhanarishvara. Vivec is born a hermaphrodite, meaning the texts refer to it with both masculine and feminine pronouns, and this is reflected in its appearance. As you know, half of Vivec's skin is golden, characteristic of the Chimer, while the other half is ash-colored, typical of the Dunmer. This represents a perfect synthesis of opposites. Thus, Vivec's dual-gendered nature becomes a direct reflection of Ardhanarishvara, the combined and androgynous form of the Hindu god Shiva and his consort Parvati. Ardhanarishvara symbolizes the inseparability of masculine and feminine energies, stillness and dynamism, and how the universal creative force emerges from the unity of these opposites, similar to the story of Anu and Padme that creates the Elder Scrolls universe. Within the Tribunal, Vivec embodies this principle of balance. Remember that Almalexia as a warrior represented stillness and the past, while Sothasil as a mage represented change and the future. Vivec is recognized as the warrior poet who contains and balances both. Even Vivec's spear, the Muatra, crafted from Molag Bal's penis, carries this duality, both a phallic-piercing weapon and a receptive symbol. Another interpretation of Vivec's story can be framed within a Gnostic perspective. In Gnosticism, the material world is seen as a flawed prison created by a lower, ignorant god called the Demiurge, and it is believed that this world holds captive sparks of divinity originating from a higher god. Salvation comes through intuitive and secret knowledge known as Gnosis. In Elder Scrolls mythology, Lorkhan tricked the Aedra into creating the mortal plane, Mundus. In this story, it appears as a cunning god who traps divine power in the mortal world. In this context, we can place Lorkhan in the role of the Demiurge I just mentioned. When we view it this way, can you see how the concept of CHIM closely resembles Gnosis? Just as Gnosis is the knowledge that reality is a flawed prison or dream, Vivec, through reaching CHIM, becomes aware of this condition within its universe, transcends the flawed laws of creation, and becomes a being who understands the true nature of reality. As I mentioned before, Vivec's 36 lessons functions like a Gnostic gospel designed to guide a chosen successor toward the same enlightenment. As you might have guessed, this successor is the Nerevarine, whom we control in the series' third game. In conclusion, Vivec is a synthesis of the many layers I've described, and even more that the video couldn't fully cover. It is a highly postmodern video game character capable of subjectively altering history. For it, reality has never been a fixed point. Reality is always a narrative it can shape. Its story is a meditation on guilt, sacrifice, and the burdens of power. Vivec wants to be everything: a savior, a killer, a deceiver, and a teacher. Yet, as I quoted from Sothasil at the beginning of the video, at the end of the day, it can only be Vivec. Before concluding the video, I should note that there are still many historical events about Vivec that I haven't covered. I didn't talk about the Banquet of Fire, the wars with the Nords, the Monster Children, and how it defeated them one by one, its relationship with the Nerevarine, or the many miracles it performed during its godhood. From a biographical perspective, Vivec is one of the most active and influential characters in Elder Scrolls history. Each of these events could warrant a separate video, and its divinity could also be analyzed in another. For this reason, I chose to focus on a philosophical exploration rather than recount every historical detail. Still, I should mention that Vivec repeatedly saved the Dunmer people from destruction and invasion. During the Akaviri invasion, it granted its people the ability to breathe underwater and submerged all of Morrowind, repelling the invaders. It ensured that Morrowind remained an independent nation for roughly 2 centuries until Tiber Septim's conquest. Though a symbolic poet god whose ways were often difficult for the people to understand, Vivec always helped its people. There are even stories of it personally working in the fields for days to save a farmer's harvest. During the Tribunal era, Vivec was seen as a god-king for the Dunmer nation, embodying the duality of all its people. However, Vivec's tendency to blur the past, provide contradictory answers, and make controversial decisions also caused it to be viewed with suspicion. To reinforce its divinity and demonstrate its people's dependence, Vivec stopped the Bar Dao meteor from falling onto Vvardenfell. Yet it never shattered it or sent it back into space. For centuries, Bar Dao remained suspended above Vivec City, serving as a testament to Vivec's godhood. However, in the Third Era, when the Nerevarine destroyed Lorkhan's heart, Vivec lost its divine power and vanished, leaving nothing to hold Bar Dao. The meteor crashed into Vvardenfell, causing the Red Mountain eruption and burying the entire region under lava and ash. This catastrophe resulted in the Dunmer losing political power, forcing much of the population to migrate to Skyrim and fracturing regional unity. The subsequent Argonian invasion can also be seen as a consequence of the decline that began after Bar Dao's fall. Vivec could have destroyed the meteor at any time, yet it chose to leave it there as a symbol of its power and the dependence of its people. In conclusion, if I were to sum everything up, I believe Vivec represents one of the most ambitious attempts in video game history to create a character whose nature is deeply intertwined with the very simulation it exists within. Its powers mirror the player's own abilities, while its story serves as a reflection on the narrative that encompasses it. The most fascinating aspect is that Vivec's philosophy is a complex creation inspired by real-world mysticism. Vivec is more than just a character inside a game, it is also a commentary on the game itself. Its life, which brought both disaster and salvation to Morrowind, places it among the most unforgettable figures in the Elder Scrolls pantheon, and in our minds. With that, we've reached the end of my series on the living gods of Morrowind, the Tribunal. I hope you've enjoyed both this video and the series as a whole. The Tribunal has been a topic I've long wanted to explore, and creating these 3 videos has truly been a rewarding experience. Finally, your support is my biggest motivation for producing Elder Scrolls content. By liking this video and subscribing to my channel, you'd be giving me tremendous support. You can also share your thoughts about Vivec's awareness and the Tribunal in the comments below. I'll see you in the next video.